Good afternoon. My name is Diana Ferguson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Florida Local Environmental Resource Agencies, which is a voluntary association of city and county environmental programs, consulting firms, and non-governmental organizations. I'm going to offer you some training and information this afternoon on county roles and responsibilities in environmental law. First, let's talk about solid waste collection and recycling. Counties do provide solid waste and recycling collection services to their residents. There are usually franchise agreements with private companies, and all of the statutory requirements for solid waste and recycling are governed by Chapter 403 of the Florida statutes. There is in Florida a 75% recycling goal, and state and local agencies and other public entities like public schools are required to share their recycling data with counties. The private sector is also encouraged but not required to share that data. Local governments also provide petroleum storage tank cleanup services for both the cleanup work and compliance verification. And there are currently 13 counties that provide these services to the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, and they serve an area that covers 21 counties. There are 2 line items in the state budget that we monitor closely every year and advocate for full funding of in order to support those efforts. There's a line item for the cleanup contracting and a line item for the compliance verification. And that is something that we lend lots of support to every legislative session, because the work that DEP does with the counties is actually a really successful program. They do as good of a job or better than the private sector at performing those functions, and they provide an important support to the DEP in this program. The brownfields program is another area of interest to local governments. Brownfields are properties that are typically abandoned due to contamination, and they're unusable currently. And local governments designate those brownfields by resolution. Once they're designated, they can receive lots of grant funding, a wide variety of state and local incentives that are intended to clean those properties up and sustainably reuse them. There are 3 counties with delegation oversight of the brownfield program. And this is a picture of Cascade Park in Tallahassee. It's an example of a successfully redeveloped brownfield, and Cascades Park has become really a center in the city for, there's lots of recreation, folks walking their dogs, just recreating. There's an amphitheater that has concerts, and there are lots and lots of folks in Cascades Park. And this was a large property that was abandoned for many, many years and unused. So that's an example of what the Brownfields program can do. There are 8 approved local air programs in the state of Florida, and they conduct ambient air quality monitoring. They take the lead for air compliance and for enforcement activities in those counties. 6 of those programs are also delegated permitting authority for most types of air pollution sources. And the staff in the air programs also typically work with staff in other programs such as solid waste and code enforcement, and get involved in issues such as dust issues, odor issues. So the air program can cross over with other programs on occasion. But over the course of the last couple of decades, Florida's air quality has improved tremendously, and we no longer have any non-attainment areas. Wastewater is another important function provided by counties, and some counties do provide wastewater utility services to their residents. There are a number of Florida statutes that govern those utilities. And as we've had more and more extreme weather events, we've had more sewage spills, and they have been routinely the subject of legislation in Tallahassee. There's lots of work happening in the wastewater space right now, in particular because many basin management action plans, or BMAPs, are requiring upgrades in the near future. And those plans are the result of the total maximum daily load program, TMDLs. There are a number of designated TMDLs, and it's growing. A TMDL is a numeric expression of the amount of a pollutant that a water body can assimilate and still attain its designated uses. And so as those TMDLs are developed, those eventually result in basin management action plans, and local governments and other stakeholders work with DEP on developing those, and they agree to undertake certain activities in order to achieve the TMDL. There's lots of work that goes into that. It's very complicated, and there are lots of players in that space, a lot of things that have to happen in order to achieve those. And it's been the subject of legislation in Tallahassee several years in a row now. So there have been lots of changes, and there's a good amount of work happening in that space, and we expect that to continue and continue to grow. Now, obviously, not everything can have a central wastewater system. And so, in rural areas in particular, where central sewer is just not economically feasible, wastewater is typically treated utilizing on-site wastewater treatment, which can happen in a couple of different ways. It can be individual septic tanks. It can be systems that are a little bit more sophisticated that serve an area. The Department of Health previously regulated those on-site wastewater treatment systems, but the program is currently under the process of being transferred to the Department of Environmental Protection. This was required by legislation that passed a few years ago. And local governments do get involved in this space through their land use regulations as well, such as setbacks and things of that nature that can govern the placement of the systems. And certain counties have more stringent treatment standards that would apply as well. Um, there's a lot of interplay between on-site wastewater treatment and centralized treatment. Connecting folks to centralized systems can be very costly. There can be barriers to that. And some local governments also offer rebates to help property owners upgrade existing on-site wastewater treatment where connection to central sewer is not possible. Stormwater is another area of water policy that counties are integrally involved in. Counties provide stormwater management to prevent flooding and to improve water quality. Many counties operate what's called a municipal separate storm sewer, or an MS4, which is required to have an NPDES permit. That's National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. Those are issued by the Environmental Protection Agency. And an MS4 is a publicly owned conveyance that can include everything from ditches, curbs, catch basins, pipes, everything that's designed to collect stormwater and discharge it to surface waters of the state. Floodplain management is a related area of water policy, and local governments regulate floodplains primarily to protect people and to protect property. This can help make sure that federal floodplain insurance is available, save tax dollars, and avoid liability in lawsuits. The National Flood Insurance Program, the NFIP, is based on a mutual agreement between the federal government and the communities that participate in it. And those communities agree to regulate development in mapped floodplain areas. Some of the activities that they undertake are governed by the community rating system. So the activities that local governments choose to undertake can help improve their CRS. And that means that the insurance that's available in that community is going to be more affordable for folks. And so something that's complicated floodplain management in the last several years is that there have been a number of legislative preemptions. And every time the legislature preempts something, it can make it, in this space, it can make it more difficult for local governments to maintain their CRS rating and to provide affordable NFIP insurance in their community. Wetlands are the source of a number of environmental regulations and regulations at the local level. State environmental resource permit regulations govern wetlands impacts and mitigation. Sometimes local governments have more stringent requirements for impacts to wetlands, and that's because they're critically important in improving water quality. So the more wetlands are available, the less you need hardened infrastructure in order to improve water quality. Wetlands are really the cheapest way to do that. They also provide important fish and wildlife habitats. They help store floodwaters to prevent flooding, and they maintain surface water flow during dry periods. 3 counties in Florida currently have delegation agreements with DEP regarding certain wetland and related regulations. But particularly when development is at a high, we often see that spill over into legislative proposals to preempt local wetland regulations, to limit the local role in wetlands protection. But it is critically important for local governments to maintain that authority so that they can really have the flexibility to ensure that there aren't impacts that would make it more difficult and more expensive and more costly to meet the mandates in terms of improvement to water quality and also flooding. Water conservation and springs protection is another important local function. Several counties actively promote water conservation programs and measures to ensure future public supply and to ensure the continued health of sensitive aquatic ecosystems, such as aquifer-fed rivers and springs. Particularly local governments that need water use permits, it's important to conserve water so that they can, not bump up against their consumptive use permit limits. And that's, that ebbs and flows over time. There were local governments that were very close to meeting their permit limits. And then we saw, the recession in 2007 and 2008. And all of those, the water use went down and that it sort of, organically dealt with itself. But those are issues that local governments have to balance and think about. Now, while water management districts are responsible for consumptive use permitting and for setting minimum flows and levels, local governments govern land uses that directly affect demand for water use. And local governments can sometimes implement tiered permitting where they're the water utility. So there's a number of different ways in which the counties can have a role in water conservation and in springs protection. Trees have been an issue that has come up legislatively more and more over the last several years, and many counties have tree protection ordinances. Those are not new. Florida's urban counties, in particular, often have measures in place to protect their tree canopies to combat urban heat island effect. And very frequently, cities and counties choose to protect certain types of trees that are historic or heritage or specimen trees. And many local governments participate in the Tree City USA program. The Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services Urban Forestry Program is available to assist local governments in achieving this designation. And being a tree city allows you to qualify for certain federal grants, and there are many benefits to being a tree city. Complicating all of this, though, there were a few high-profile cases a number of years ago where there were exorbitantly high fees in certain South Florida cities. Those were for removing a tree or excessive replanting requirements, things of that nature. And they received a lot of media attention. They were the subject of legislation that passed several years ago. That legislation designates circumstances under which local government can't require a permit to remove a tree and can't require replanting measures. And it allows you to use an arborist or a landscape architect to circumvent local permitting requirements. That has worked in some areas, but there have been lots of instances of developers, frankly, not following the requirements of that statute and doing lots of clearing. And it has been a problem since the passage of that statute. It has been amended once to improve it, and it does seem to have improved it somewhat. But since the passage of that statute, the tree canopy in South Florida has been in pretty significant decline, actually. And there have been, a number of stakeholders supporting either revisiting that statute. There are some stakeholders that want to repeal it, although that's unlikely. And there have been a lot of local governments who have started to look at seeking state appropriations in order to help support tree planting to enhance the tree canopy. But those have been controversial and haven't gotten a lot of traction. So I expect this to be an ongoing topic of discussion. Beach nourishment is another typical program for coastal counties, and Florida's beach program is a model nationwide. Florida has over 825 miles of sandy beaches, and most of Florida's coastal counties do participate in the statewide beach management program at DEP. This allows them to cost share beach nourishment and renourishment projects with the state. And Florida also has a number of federal projects, which allows for a cost share between the federal, state, and local government. The statewide beach nourishment program typically receives $50 million of land acquisition trust funds that are recurring every year. And there have been some years where it's been much, much more than that. It's been upwards of $100 million. And so we do make a significant investment in beach nourishment in Florida, but that nourishment protects all of the upland property and habitat and so many things. And the cost benefit is 7-to-1 or 8-to-1, depending on the economic study. So it's definitely a very worthwhile program in Florida. Living shorelines have become a popular type of a project in the last number of years. And historically, we saw the installation of seawalls in many coastal locations where it wasn't possible to have a nourished sandy beach, but where the upland property and infrastructure still required protection. Today, many coastal areas are opting for living shorelines projects. Those improve water quality, provide fisheries habitat, they improve biodiversity, and they promote recreation, and they are more resilient against storms than seawalls. So hard shoreline structures can prevent natural marsh migration and may create seaward erosion. Living shorelines are a way to combat that, and they are a suite of shoreline erosion control techniques that can combine the natural coastal habitats with possibly some natural or engineered solutions as a means of breaking up the wave energy. Some counties also have local conservation or land buying programs to acquire and manage conservation and preservation lands. Counties often manage state lands as well. They manage lands for the state and manage their own local lands. These are lands that typically provide sensitive environmental natural habitats. They're wetlands and forests and include habitat for endangered and imperiled species. And that's the conclusion of our presentation.